What if the self you believe you are was never truly you? What if the identity you defend, the name you carry, the story you tell is just a costume worn by consciousness, a passing dream that believes itself real? We spend our lives protecting an image. We polish it, decorate it, compare it, defend it. Yet we rarely ask, who is the one behind the mask? Who watches all these roles play out and silently knows that none of them are the whole truth? Alan Watts often said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. And in that paradox lies the mystery of self-identity. The endless game where the mind builds a prison and calls it me, because the self we cling to is not who we are. It's a story, a performance, a flickering wave pretending to be the ocean. Today, we explore the hidden dangers of self-identity, the illusions that trap us in roles we mistake for reality, and the wisdom that frees us to simply be. This journey will not ask you to believe, only to observe, to look calmly at the dance between who you think you are and what you truly are. So take a breath and listen, not just with your mind, but with the quiet space behind it, because that silence is where you've been all along. Before we begin, if this message finds you today, it's not by chance. Maybe it's the reminder you were meant to hear. So, take a moment, share your reflection or realization in the comments below. Tell us. Who were you before the world told you who to be? And if you find truth in these words, subscribe to this journey of awakening. Not just to the channel, but to your own unfolding awareness. Because each story, each silence, is a step closer to remembering yourself. Number 1, the mask that forgot it was a mask of identity begins as something innocent, a tool, a simple instrument, a name through which life can play its song. You were born into a world that needed to call you something, so they gave you a name. And from that first word, the long dream of I began. At first, the mask was light. You wore it as children wear costumes, freely, joyfully, without believing too deeply in the story. You said, I am the explorer, or I am the hero. And then, when the play was done, you took it off and laughed. You knew it wasn't real. But somewhere along the path, the costume began to cling to your skin. The names and roles hardened into something serious. You were told to behave a certain way, to think a certain way, to believe a certain way. And slowly, the playful mask became a face you could not remove. Alan Watts said, each of us is a social role, a kind of caricature of ourselves. We act the part so long that we begin to forget that it was ever an act at all. The teacher, the parent, the artist, the lover, each role is beautiful. Yet none are complete. Because no matter how many roles we play, they are all fragments of a truth too vast to fit any single name. Have you noticed how we cling to these identities as if they were life rafts? We say, I am this, and secretly pray the world agrees. We attach our worth to how others see our mask, and so the more we seek validation, the less real we become. There is a subtle tragedy in this. For the more you polish your mask, the more it blinds you to the one who wears it. You forget that the mask was meant to express the soul, not to replace it. It is like a musician who becomes obsessed with their instrument, forgetting the melody that once gave it purpose, or a painter who begins worshipping the brush instead of the beauty that flows through it. We do this every day. We confuse the surface for the source. We take the reflection for reality. The ancient sages called this Maya, the grand illusion of identity. It is not evil. It is the necessary dream through which consciousness explores itself. But when we take the dream too seriously, we suffer. Watts described the self as a pattern in the stream of life. You are not a fixed thing. You are a process, a rhythm, a dance of form and emptiness. To mistake the mask for the dancer is to mistake the shadow for the sun. The danger of self-identity is that it builds a cage around something that was never meant to be contained. It tells you what you should want, who you should love, what you should fear. And when life shifts, as it always does, the identity trembles. We panic because the person we thought we were begins to dissolve. But here lies the paradox. The dissolution of the mask is not the death of you. It is the beginning of freedom. You see, every time the mask cracks, life gives you a glimpse of what lies beneath. A space, a silence, a witnessing presence untouched by the stories you tell. That is who you truly are. Watts once said, "The real you is not a puppet which life pushes around. The real, deep down you is the whole universe." And that is not poetry. It is fact. The self you defend so fiercely is a single wave, believing it is separate from the ocean. But when you finally see that the ocean is not apart from the wave, your whole being softens. You realize there is no need to cling, because you are never lost. Think of how exhausting it is to constantly maintain your story, to prove your worth, to uphold your image, to be consistent with your past, but as a mirror of the same consciousness, trying to recognize itself. Have you ever noticed that, when love is pure, it makes you more yourself? Not less. That kind of love doesn't trap. It liberates. It doesn't demand you stay. It trusts that you belong. Watts once said, "The real reason for marriage is not to make people happy, but to make them conscious. Every relationship is a mirror showing us the places we still hide." The danger lies in believing that the reflection is the source. You cannot drink from the image of water. You must go within to find the spring itself. The self that destroys itself. For love does so because it has forgotten its own divinity. It kneels before another and says, "Save me." But what it really means is, "Remind me who I am." And so, love becomes a teacher. It shatters the falls, so that what remains can finally love without need. Watts said that the highest form of love is letting go, not as abandonment, but as trust. Trust that the bond is deeper than possession. That connection does not depend on control. When you stop clinging, you don't lose love, you discover its true nature. Imagine two flames side by side. They do not consume each other. They dance. They create warmth together, each keeping its own shape, its own light. That is real love, the meeting of two whole beings, not the merging of two broken halves. The self that destroys itself believes that love demands suffering, but love, in its purest form, asks only presence. It asks that you see yourself as clearly as you see the one before you. When you no longer need love to complete you, you begin to experience love as creation itself. You love because it is your nature to do so. You give not to be needed, but because giving is joy. You let go, not because you are tired, but because holding on would be untrue. To love from fullness is to bless the world without expecting it to bless you back. And that is the end of suffering. The moment love ceases to be a barking and becomes the rhythm of being. Watts once said, "You are the universe experiencing itself in endless disguise." So, when you love another, you are simply the universe recognizing itself. In another form, the danger of self-identity in love is thinking, "This person makes me who I am." But the truth is, they only reveal what was already there. The one who truly understands love no longer destroys themselves for it. They dissolve within it, not as loss, but as expansion. They realize that love was never meant to save you. It was meant to remind you that you were never lost. In the end, all of our masks fall. The spiritual, the intellectual, the romantic, they all dissolve in the same quiet light. You begin to see that what you've been calling you was never a fixed thing. It was a movement, a pattern of awareness, dancing through form. Watts said, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. And when you stop trying, you finally laugh. Because it's all been a cosmic game. The game of pretending to be separate, so that you could rediscover the joy of returning. The self you've been protecting was never under threat. The control you've been clinging to was never real power. The love you've been seeking was never lost. You were never the mask, the name, the story. You were the silence before it all began, the awareness behind every face. And when you see this, when you really feel it, you stop fighting the river of life. You begin to float. not in surrender, but in understanding. You see that everything you feared losing was never yours to keep, and everything you truly are can never be lost. The self is not an object. It is a verb. It is the act of seeing itself endlessly, playfully, through every being, every experience. The tragedy of identity is forgetting that the mask was always meant to come off. The beauty of awakening is realizing it was you behind all the masks. So now, perhaps it's time to breathe again, to smile at the illusion, to thank it for the lesson, and to live, not as a role, but as the presence behind the play. Because you are not in the universe. You are the universe, playing hide-and-seek with yourself. And when the game ends, when all searching ceases, what remains is not a person. It is peace. Now, before you go, if this reflection touched you, if somewhere in these words you found a glimpse of yourself, then take a moment to share your thoughts below. Your reflections are part of this conversation, and your voice might be the reminder someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe for more Alan Watts-inspired narrations, where philosophy meets poetry, and where words become a mirror to your own awakening. Studies the tide, but forgets to look at the sky. They are so busy managing the ocean that they forget to taste its salt. Alan Watts once compared control to tension in music. A symphony is beautiful, not because every note is predictable, but because it contains surprise, change, release. To control every note would destroy the song. And yet, that is how most people live. They try to script every outcome, to guarantee every ending, to secure every love. But in doing so, they kill the very spontaneity that makes life worth living. When you trust life, you don't stop steering, you just stop fighting the current. You realize that every bend, every wave, every detour has its own intelligence. The controller fears chaos, but chaos is only order we haven't yet understood. The storms of life are not punishments, they are awakenings. Have you noticed how, after your most painful experiences, you emerge softer, wiser, more alive? That is life teaching you what control could never have delivered. Real growth. The danger of control is that it closes the heart. To manage everything is to stop trusting anything. And in that distrust, we lose connection with the very mystery that keeps us alive. Watts said, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at itself. You are not outside of life. You are within it, of it, and moved by it." When you try to dominate life, you forget that the hands doing the controlling are themselves made of stardust. The controller cannot see that they are being carried, always have been, always will be. Letting go is not failure. It is the deepest act of courage. To surrender is not to give up, but to give in to life's natural intelligence, to the breath that breathes you, to the silence between every heartbeat. Control ends where trust begins. You begin to see that even your mistakes were necessary, that every detour was part of the dance. And when you look back, you realize it all unfolded as it needed to. Because life is not something happening to you, it is something happening as you. So when the mind screams, hold on. Let the body breathe instead. Let the current move through you. Let the river teach you how to float again. You were never meant to steer the whole ocean. You were meant to trust its tide. Number 6. The self that destroys itself in the name of love. There's no illusion more seductive, no more dangerous, than the illusion of love born from emptiness. The human heart longs to merge, to dissolve into something greater than itself. And yet, when it does not know its own depth, it mistakes attachment for devotion, possession for intimacy, and self-sacrifice for compassion. Alan Watts once said, "When you try to control people, you have no faith in them. The same is true of love. When you cling to someone, you have no faith in yourself. The self that destroys itself in the name of love is the one that believes, if I give enough, they will stay. If I suffer enough, I will be worthy. If I lose myself, I will finally be seen. But love born from fear is not love, it is dependence. It is the echo of an unhealed loneliness calling itself devotion. Have you ever given everything to someone, only to find yourself emptier than before? That emptiness is not punishment. It is revelation. It shows you that the well you were drawing from was not infinite. It was borrowed. The controller of the last chapter tries to manage life. The lover of this one tries to manage pain. Both forget the same truth. Love cannot be managed. It must be allowed. True love does not demand surrender of your essence. It requires you to bring your wholeness. It does not ask you to burn yourself for another's warmth. It asks you to share your fire without extinguishing your own flame. Watts spoke often of how the more one tries to make love permanent, the more it vanishes, because love is not a possession. It is a movement, a dance, a wind, a tide. It must be free to change shape. The self that destroys itself for love cannot trust the flow of connection. It clings to people as if they were the ground beneath its feet, forgetting that even the earth moves. The tragedy is not that love ends, but that we believe we end with it. We say, they were my everything. But how can another person be everything to you when you yourself are made of stars? To love deeply is beautiful. To love blindly is self-betrayal. True love is not sacrifice. It is awareness shared. It sees the other not as a savior or an enemy, only to return to where you started and finally see it for the first time. The danger of the seeker is not that they look too far, but that they never truly look here. They meditate, but they meditate to achieve. They breathe, but they breathe with expectation. They pray, but they pray to be rewarded. And all the while, life sits patiently beside them, whispering, I have been here all along. You cannot capture truth with effort. You can only relax into it. As what side muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. When you stop trying to fix yourself, when you stop trying to get somewhere, when you stop trying to become something, the seeking dissolves, and what remains is the peace you were chasing all along to mindset. I must let go. But who is the I that lets go? Even that becomes another grasping. Real letting go happens when there is no one left to do it. The search ends not when the seeker reaches enlightenment, but when the seeker realizes they were never separate from it. Imagine standing before a still lake. You lean forward to look for your reflection, but the more you move, the more ripples you create. Only when you stop, when you stand completely still, does the reflection appear on its own. That is how awakening happens in stillness, not pursuit. The ego loves the idea of progress. It needs milestones, rituals, gurus, techniques, but the soul needs none of it. The soul is already complete. It is the ocean pretending to be thirsty. So if you feel lost in your spiritual path, take heart. Even the confusion is part of the awakening. The maze itself is made of light. The true teacher does not give you answers. They only remind you of what you've always known. They don't lead you to the truth. They help you see that there was never a place to go. Watts once said, to wake up, you need to realize that you've been dreaming, and perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. To stop trying to wake yourself and simply notice the dream. For in that noticing, the dream loses its power, and what remains is the gentle, effortless awareness that was never asleep. Number 5. The controller who cannot trust life there is a certain kind of suffering that hides behind the illusion of control. It looks composed, intelligent, responsible, but underneath, it trembles. The controller is the one who cannot rest in uncertainty. They build their life like a fortress, brick by brick, plan by plan, believing safety lies in mastery. They do not realize that their walls are made of fear. Alan Watts once said, to have faith is to trust yourself to the water. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you will sink and drown. Instead, you relax and float, but the controller cannot float. They must No, predict, anticipate, secure. They cling to the surface of life, never daring to let the current carry them. They call it discipline. They call it strength. But often, it is just fear masquerading as wisdom. Have you ever noticed how the more tightly you try to hold on to something, the faster it seems to slip away? Love, success, even peace, they all recoil from grasping hands. The controller believes that to trust life is to lose control, but control itself is the very thing that keeps them from truly living. Life is not a machine to be managed. It is a river wild, unpredictable, alive, and the more you try to straighten it, the more it floods through the cracks of your plans. Watts often reminded us that uncertainty is not the enemy. It is the very essence of existence. He said, the desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To seek perfect safety is to chase your own shadow. We spend our lives trying to ensure tomorrow, while tomorrow is just a concept spinning in the mind. We prepare endlessly for moments that never truly arrive, because life only ever happens now. The controller cannot accept this. They say, I must make things right. But the world is not something to be made right. It is something to be understood, to be danced with. Have you ever danced with someone who was trying too hard to lead? It's rigid, uncomfortable. But when both surrender to the rhythm, something magical happens. Grace appears. That's how life works. When you stop trying to choreograph the universe, you begin to feel its natural rhythm. The great paradox is that true power comes not from control, but from trust. Control is born of fear. Trust is born of understanding. To trust life is not to abandon direction, but to flow with it, like a sailor who moves with the wind, not against it. The controller builds maps, charts every star, is because you are insecure. The ego feeds on insecurity. It survives through opposition. Without something to resist, it fades. Have you noticed that the moment you stop arguing with life, a great peace arrives? Not because the world has changed, but because you've stopped trying to hold it still. That stillness, that quiet awareness, is not the ego. It is what remains when the ego finally rests. Imagine a flame dancing in a dark room. The ego believes it must fight the darkness to survive, but the flame doesn't fight. It simply shines. Darkness has never threatened it. In fact, without the dark, its light would not even be seen. That is how you must come to see life. There is no enemy. There is only the play of form and emptiness, only the constant rhythm of appearing and vanishing. And here's the strange beauty. The moment you stop trying to escape death, you realize you were never separate from it. Death is not the end of life. It is life renewing itself. Watts said it best. Death and life are non-opposite. They are two sides of the same coin. When the ego dies, you finally stop clinging to the coin and see the space it spins within. The danger of self-identity is not in being someone, but in believing that someone must last forever. The ego's obsession with permanence is the root of all suffering. It builds walls where there should be windows, and armor where there should be openness. But when the walls crumble, when everything you thought you were begins to fade, you begin to notice something miraculous. The sky remains. The silence remains. The awareness that witnessed every change remains untouched. You are not losing yourself. You are returning. You are coming home. And in that home, there is no fear, because nothing can be taken from what was never separate to begin with. So the next time you feel the fear of change, when the old identity begins to fall apart, don't rush to rebuild it. Let it fall. Let it crumble like autumn leaves, returning to the soil, because what falls away was never real, and what remains was never born. Number 4. The seeker who traps themselves in the search. There is a peculiar paradox in the human soul. The more desperately we seek truth, the further it seems to drift away. The seeker believes they are on a noble path, and in one sense, they are, but hidden beneath that quest is often the very illusion they are trying to escape. We long for enlightenment, for awakening, for peace. We climb mountains, devour books, repeat mantras, hoping to find the secret door that leads to the eternal. Yet the door is everywhere, and the key is nothing more than this moment. Alan Watts once said, "You can't get there from here, because you are there already." But the seeker doesn't believe this. They keep walking, not realizing that each step only takes them deeper into the forest of their own mind. Have you ever wondered why? Enlightenment always seems like something that will happen later. Why peace feels like a destination instead of a birthright? It's because the seeker's identity depends on the search. The moment they find what they're looking for, they stop being the seeker. And so, unconsciously, they keep the journey alive, never arriving, always becoming. That is the quiet trap of spirituality. It becomes another mask for the ego, another game of achievement. Instead of money or fame, we chase purity, stillness, transcendence. We compare our depth, our wisdom, our vibrations, and all the while, the very chase blinds us to what is. Watts laughed at this beautifully. He said that trying to improve yourself spiritually is like polishing a brick to make it a mirror. It's a magnificent effort, but the brick remains a brick. The mind cannot polish itself into silence. Silence begins when the polishing stops. We are not lost because we lack direction. We are lost because we keep mistaking the map for the journey. We read philosophies, collect teachings, build entire identities around being awakened. But awakening cannot be possessed. It can only be experienced, and the one who experiences it disappears in the moment it happens. You cannot hold stillness. You can only be it. Have you noticed how, after every great insight, the mind quickly rushes in to label it? It says, "I've found it. I've seen the truth." And in that very moment, truth slips through your fingers again. Because the truth cannot belong to anyone. It is not an object of knowledge, but the space in which knowledge appears. Watts often compared life to music. He said, "We thought of life as a journey, as a pilgrimage which had a serious purpose at the end. But the point of music is the music. You don't listen to a symphony to get to the last note. You dance to it as it unfolds. But the seeker listens for the ending, and in doing so, misses the song entirely. To seek truth is not wrong. It is the yearning of the soul remembering its home. But when the search becomes a performance, a badge of superiority, or a shield against fear, it turns poisonous. The true seeker realizes that the journey is circular. You walk the path, and yet life never asked this of you. It only asks that you flow, that you move, shift, change, and allow the infinite to express itself through you. But the mind fears its freedom. It says, "If I am not my name, my role, my history, then what am I?" And in that question lies the doorway to awakening. Because what you truly are cannot be spoken. It cannot be reduced to words or labels. You are the awareness behind every identity, the silent witness of every role, the space in which all things appear and disappear. When you realize this, you don't stop playing roles. You simply stop believing you are them. You become the dancer again, not the mask. You can be a teacher without being bound by the image of one. You can be a parent without losing your essence. You can love without ownership, create without ego, succeed without fear of failure, because success and failure are both waves on the same sea. Watts used to laugh gently when people asked him, "How do I find myself?" He would say, "You don't need to find yourself. You only need to stop pretending you are something else." That is the essence of awakening. Not the creation of a new identity, but the falling away of the false. When you see through the mask, life becomes art again. You act, you speak, you feel, but it's no longer out of defense or fear. It's an expression of something deeper, something endlessly creative. And so the question remains, who are you when no one is watching? When the roles fall silent, when the world forgets your name, what remains? If you listen closely, you'll sense it now. That quiet awareness behind your thoughts. The one observing this very sentence. That is not the mask. That is not the story. That is you, the silent, formless being that has never come or gone, When you awaken to that, you no longer need to defend your identity, because you realize that every identity is simply another mask worn by life itself. And life, like a great actor, plays every part beautifully, but never forgets that it is the play. Number 3. The ego that fears its own death. The mask is the story we wear. Then the ego is the storyteller who refuses to stop speaking. It clings to the illusion of control, narrating life as if it were the author of existence itself. The ego does not live, it resists. It cannot relax into the moment, because its survival depends on separation. It whispers, "I am this, and that is not me." And with that whisper, the infinite becomes divided. Alan Watts said, "The ego is simply the symbol of yourself. It's a mental image, an echo pretending to be a voice. Yet we build our entire lives around this phantom. We obey it, defend it, suffer for it, even though, deep down, we know it isn't real." Have you ever noticed how frightened you feel when you're about to let go of something that once defined you? A belief, a status, a relationship, a sense of control. It feels almost like dying. That trembling inside, that panic when the old identity begins to fall away, that's the ego's deepest fear. Because to the ego, surrender is extinction. It cannot comprehend that what dies is only the illusion. It thinks, if I stop controlling, I will disappear. But the truth is, only the false part of you vanishes, the one that never truly lived to rail you. The silent witness behind every rise and fall has never been born, and therefore cannot die. The ego fears death because it cannot imagine what exists beyond itself. It believes that life without its commentary is meaningless. But look closer. Every time you lose yourself in music, in laughter, in love, in all, you disappear, don't you? The I falls silent. And yet, you have never been more alive. That is the great paradox. You lose yourself, and in doing so, you find what you be. Always being the ego doesn't die in flames or crisis. It dissolves quietly, like mist in morning sunlight. It fades when you stop feeding it with stories, fears, and comparisons. Watts once described life as a wave that doesn't try to reach the shore. It rises, it falls, and it is never separate from the ocean. But the ego is that single wave screaming, "I must not fall." And in that resistance, it creates its own suffering. Every form must rise and pass. Every identity, every role, every phase of life. When we fight this truth, we experience anxiety, shame, fear of loss. We try to make the wave permanent, but permanence is not the nature of reality. Flow is, the ego calls this impermanence death, but in truth, it is renewal. It is how the universe breathes. To die in each moment is to be reborn endlessly. The Buddhists call this realization anatta, the truth of no fixed self. Not that you don't exist, but that you exist too deeply to be confined to any form. You are not the thing that dies, but the awareness that watches all things come and go. And when you truly see this, you no longer fear change, because the one who feared it was never real. Think about how much energy is wasted trying to preserve a sense of me. We defend opinions. We rehearse the past. We worry about our image. All because the ego cannot stand the unknown. It needs to be someone, even if that someone is miserable. Watts used to say, the reason you want to be secure